Welcome to the South Notts Amateur Radio Club online foundation training. We're going to discuss operating procedures now, and in particular making contact, use of calling channel, introduction to repeaters, digital voice, and handling abuse. Amateur radio enthusiasts on the air tend to use the phonetic alphabet when spelling out words and abbreviations, call signs, etc. And this is something you'll need to know for the exam. This is something you may be familiar with already, but perhaps don't know all the letters or the words, and this is something to practice over and over until you get the hang of it. Please bear in mind the exam is a multiple choice question for the answers, and the right answer will be in there somewhere. However, it may be tricky since all of the answers will begin with the same letter, so it's important to know specifically which is the correct word for the correct letter. I won't go through each here, but for those of you who are unfamiliar with this, instead of saying your call sign as M7ABC, you'll hear Mike, which is the phonetic word for M, the letter M, 7, and then instead of ABC they would say Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. This becomes a huge help if you're receiving and transmitting to another person who is a long way away and is weak on the air, so you're only hearing them very quietly, perhaps with a lot of noise in the background. And M7ABC might be unintelligible due to the background noise, whereas Mike 7 Alpha Bravo Charlie will give your brain an easier time deciphering what they're saying. So this is a very useful skill to have. I highly recommend learning all the words, and again, unfortunately, it's just a case of a bit of effort practicing and testing yourself to make sure you get them. So this is the phonetic alphabet, and there may be some questions to the effect of what is the phonetic word for the letter C, and it might say Charlie, cat, car, etc., and you have to pick the correct one. So fairly straightforward and just a bit of work learning each one. Next, signal reports. When you contact somebody on the air, you'll give your name and call sign and also generally a signal report. And the format of a signal report is the readability, the strength and the tone, RST. The readability is a number that you give between 0 and 5. Now generally, or 1 and 5 I should say, generally you don't tend to say the lower numbers, because if you're going to give a 1 meaning unreadable, chances of you hearing them and them hearing you are almost nothing anyway. The strongest and best received signal would be a 5. So that means you can completely understand what they're saying, no problem at all. 4 would be, I can understand you with a little trouble. 3, even worse than that. 2 and 1, etc. So this is something to bear in mind. Try and give an accurate signal report to the other user, and they may be able to improve that, knowing that you're struggling, by pointing their Yagi towards you or putting more power on, etc. The second of the signal report items is the strength, and you can actually normally read this off the face of your radio on the screen. You'll notice the diagram at the bottom here shows a series of blocks, and that represents the strength of the signal it's receiving. So this signal on the radio here appears to be the strongest it can be, and this goes from 1 to 9. 1 to 9. So 1 would be a weak signal, 9 would be a fully strong signal, and obviously anywhere in between for the in-between numbers. The final signal report item is the tone, and this is only used for Morse code really, or data technically, but Morse code is more common. 1 being extremely poor tone, and this is the quality of the noise that's being produced. So is it a solid, clear tone that you're hearing with the Morse, or is it a scratchy, warbly noise? So 1 is poor, 9 is excellent. but that is only used for Morse or data. So for a voice conversation, you would send only the first two, the readability and the strength. For a totally readable, very strong signal, you would be saying 5, 9 or 5 and 9. 5 is the highest you can get on readability, and 9 is the strongest signal. A weaker signal that's less readable might be a 4 and 5, for example. And again, you're just gauging this by eye on the radio for the signal strength, and just by ear for the readability on what you feel the readability is. A detailed summary about this can be found in the Foundation License Now book, but a lot of this is not guesswork, but you're sort of going on your feeling of the readability and the strength. There's no hard and fast rules as such. The strength, though, if you can read that directly off the front of your type of radio, that is a big help. So readability and strength for voice. If you're doing Morse, you'd be sending 599 for a totally readable, strong, clear tone. Q codes. Amateurs use a series of Q codes. It's a form of shorthand for common radio terms. The common ones include the following. QSL means confirmation or received. So if you send a message to somebody and they reply QSL, what they're saying is, yep, I've got that, no problem. QTH, this means your location. So you would say my QTH is Nottingham, or my QTH is London, etc. QRZ means who is calling me, or who's out there. And you will hear this on contests. They'll say their call sign and then QRZ, and then they're waiting for a reply. Who's out there calling me? QSO is an actual conversation. So you would hear this referred to as, I had a QSO with Jim the other day, and we discussed antennas. So that is the act of having a conversation, QSO. QSY means change frequency. I'm going to QSY to 145,400, for example. And it's just a shorthand instead of saying change frequency. QRT means I'm going now. I'm leaving. I'm putting the radio, switching it off and going to have dinner. Right, I'm going QRT. I'll see you guys tomorrow. These are the only ones you need to know for the actual exam. QSL, QTH, QRZ, QSO, QSY and QRT. There are literally hundreds of Q codes, and they were mainly developed for Morse code. If you imagine trying to tap out a Morse over, and instead of writing who is calling me, which could take quite a bit of tapping out, versus just QRZ, it's a huge time saver. So these were developed for that purpose, but they are now used verbally for voice communications, again as perhaps a lazier way of, instead of saying a whole sentence, you can just say 3 letters. A lot of them are used on contests, again for brevity and speed, and you will need to know these 6 here. There's 2 other codes that are mentioned. CQ, and this is shorthand for calling another station, calling any station. CQ, 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 calling any station, and then you're waiting for a reply from some unknown station to then have a conversation with you. 7-3 is also a common term that's used when somebody's leaving. They'll say, I'm going QRT. 7-3s, which means best wishes. 7-3. So these, you should learn these just to make sure you know which is which. And again, you don't need to know hundreds of Q codes. These are the ones that you need to know. The bands. We must not cause interference to legitimate radio users. Some of the frequencies we can use are shared with or adjacent to other users, so we must take care. In the exam, you're provided with a frequency allocation table showing other VHF users. So during the exam, you'll get a page with this particular set of information on, and it might have questions to the effect of if you're listening to 145.000, which user will be on that frequency. So you look down the table, you find the band of frequencies that the question remarks on, and then you look to the right there and it'll tell you who's using that frequency. So for 145, that's right in the middle of the amateur and amateur satellite group of frequencies. So they could ask on any of these, for example 87.5, it might say who uses 87.5, and you can see there at the very top of the list broadcasting. So usually it's a very straightforward question, something to that effect, and you're just reading off that table. Again, a good look through and perhaps test yourself a little bit just to make sure you've got the gist of it, but a nice straightforward process there. The band plan. A band plan is used to be fair to other users. Again, we've mentioned this before. The narrow modes are mostly near the lower frequencies within each band. Sideband below 10 MHz, lower sideband is normally used, and over 10 MHz, upper sideband is normally used. These are two different modes you can, or two different methods you can use with sideband, but the general convention, there's no requirement or law as such, but the general convention is below 10 MHz, lower sideband is used, and above 10 MHz, upper sideband is used. Centre of activity, this is where to start looking for contacts on a specific mode. So the centre of activity might be on 2 meters, 145, 500, that's the calling channel, and what it's doing there is letting you know where to listen in for other people calling out. Again, watch for the exceptions, beacons, repeaters and space comms, which are highlighted there. We shouldn't really be interfering with those. We should be listening, perhaps, if that's what you're wanting to do, but making sure that we're not interfering with those systems. Making contact on VHF and UHF. These are generally for local contacts, since those frequencies are mostly line of sight communication. As part of Foundation, you will have a QSO, which again is the Q code for the conversation, and that will start on 145.500, which is indicated by the red arrow on the right hand diagram. If you look there, you'll see it says the FM calling, which is the FM frequency there for 2 meters, and that's where you would go to call out CQ and wait for a reply to then have a conversation with somebody. Once you've made contact and they've said, hello, I'm Bob, you would then say, okay, we'll change frequency to such and such a frequency, or they might say QSY to 145.400, that means change frequency, and you would continue your conversation elsewhere, leaving the calling frequency free for the next person to use. So here's a VHF example of a QSO. Here's how to have a simplex QSO on VHF. Simplex means it's just one person to one person. You're not using a repeater or anything else, it's a direct contact. So the first thing is you tune to the FM calling frequency of 145.500 MHz. Before calling, you need to listen to the frequency to make sure it's not currently in use by someone else. If you don't hear anybody, it's not in use, you can call for a specific call sign, or you can call CQ for anyone to respond. Once you've established contact, you need to move off the calling channel. You want to initially look for a free frequency, and then let your other person that you're talking to know which frequency that is and move to it. You want to listen to make sure that new frequency is not in use by another user before you move there and start talking, and then put out a call to ask, is this frequency in use, if you don't hear anyone, just to make sure. If the frequency is free, go back to the FM calling, call your contact and send them to the new frequency. So this is a fairly straightforward process. Again, just to summarise, You go to the calling frequency, listen to make sure you're not going to talk over anyone. If it's clear, you put out a call to a specific station or a CQ call. When that other person comes back to you, you look for a free frequency, you find one and you listen to see if it's being used. If you can't hear anything, you want to give your call sign and say, is this frequency in use? If you don't get a reply, then you can assume it's free. You go back to the calling channel, the FM calling channel, where the other person's waiting to hear from you, and you say, let's QSY to such and such a frequency, and then you meet them at that new frequency and continue the conversation. Again, this is something that you will have a go at live on the air, with help and instruction, of course, and it'll all make better sense if it doesn't already as you're doing it. Next, we're going to discuss repeaters. Repeaters extend ranges over a wide area to allow contact where signals may be blocked by obstacles. They're mainly intended for handheld and mobile users, and the UK has over 500 voice repeaters. They're a mix of analogue and digital. The digital ones currently are DMR, D-Star and Fusion, and some may also be linked via the internet. They're hugely popular because it can enable you to get much better coverage from a small aerial on a handheld or on a vehicle, and as you can see from the picture there, the mountain would normally prevent contact. However, the repeater on top has an excellent view of the area and therefore can pass your signal or relay your signal from one vehicle to the other, helping out avoid the obstacle. The network's run by volunteers. The most common types of repeater are on 2 meters or 70 centimeters, and the frequencies are shared all around the UK. So it's not one frequency for one repeater. Several repeaters will use the same frequency, but hopefully they're located far enough away that they don't interfere with each other. The full list of repeaters can be found at www.ukrepeaters.net, and there is a smartphone app available. How repeaters work. Repeaters have an input frequency and an output frequency, so they can transmit and receive simultaneously. Typically 2 meter repeaters transmit 600 kHz above their input frequency, and 77 repeaters transmit a 1.6 MHz or 7.6 MHz below the input frequency. Repeaters are smart in that they only let in valid signals. There are timeouts to cut down on long overs, and you must listen for a tone to be transmitted before you start transmitting again. That tone indicates that the timeout has been reset. You need to program your radio with the offset and something called a CTCSS tone, which gives you access to the repeater, a bit like a password. You mustn't use repeater input or output frequencies for simplex, which means two-way operation direct to someone else, as it will stop others using the repeater. CTCSS tones, this stands for Continuous Tone Coded Squelch System. This is a low frequency tone which is continuously transmitted as part of your audio. So whilever you're keying the radio, this tone is transmitted in the background. Repeaters will only activate if they hear the appropriate tone for that repeater. And what this does is it blocks interference. There are 9 blocks of tones in the UK, identified by letters. You must program your radio to transmit the right tone for the particular repeater you're wanting to use. When accessing a repeater, ensure that you have the correct offset. Note on the display here at the top right the minus sign. This means that the offset is negative, meaning when you key up it's going to drop the frequency by a certain amount and then transmit there while it's listening at the higher frequency. Ensure that you're setting and sending the correct CT/CSS tone. Note again on the display on the lower right the ENC or T symbol, which is on the top one. These are both telling you it's an encoded tone, or the T just for tone, but this is letting you know that the CT/CSS tone is enabled. Store the repeater setting to a memory for easy recall. Most radios now have hundreds if not thousands of memory settings, and you can set the frequencies, the tone, the offset, etc., and a name on a particular memory, and then you just press the memory button and it will bring up everything you need to access that repeater without typing it all in it every time. Using a repeater. What we'd recommend is to listen in to your local repeater and learn the etiquette. How do people speak when they're currently using it? And generally, you'll find that call signs and locations are used far more often than is required. This is helpful though for anybody tuning into the repeater and going away, and then somebody else tuning in and listening. People can hear where somebody is and who they are, since you will have a lot of people coming in and out regularly. You'll notice the timeouts and tones. The timeouts mean that you can only talk for so long, and it prevents somebody hogging the repeater non-stop for an unrealistic amount of time. And the tones indicate when that timeout is reset, ready for the next conversation, and it usually happens several seconds after the first conversation has been chopped short. The type of call out you will hear on a repeater is something to the effect of "This is M7QQQ listening for any calls." You might hear somebody reply "break," and the first station will then say "break station, go ahead," and they'll announce their call sign and start a conversation. You will find in certain areas there's a lot of repeater nets as well. This is where a group of people will get on the repeater and have a chat, a net within the group, and they can be excellent help for people in a fairly large area to all talk together, where normally obstacles and hills would prevent them from contacting each other. Next, we're going to discuss digital voice. And digital voice, you'll notice it's annotated as DV on a lot of paperwork, or digital data modes as well, DD. And these generally are the three main systems: D-Star, which is used mainly by ICOM, but also some Kenwood radios do it; C4FM or Fusion, which is designed and used by Yaesu; and DMR, which used to be a commercial and still is a commercial method, and now amateurs use it too. The different systems may not be compatible with each other, and appropriate radio equipment is needed for each one of these digital systems. So unfortunately, at present, people with D-Star radios cannot talk to Fusion radio holders, or vice versa, and DMR likewise cannot communicate with the others. So you need to be buying a radio that's the same type as the people you want to talk to. DV radios usually have the call sign embedded in the software, so you have to check the setup when borrowing DV equipment to make sure that you change it to your own call sign before you use it. When you key up on these radios, it's transmitting the call sign that's embedded in the software, and you need to make sure that that is your call sign and not somebody else's by accident. Users of DV should check that the channel is not in use by other modes. These checks are not 100% reliable though. With data modes such as FT8, PSK31, SSTV, JT65, etc., they involve connecting your radio to a computer, usually using a data interface. If connecting anything other than a microphone, make sure that the radio's push to talk is set correctly. The audio signal levels into and out of the radio need to be set correctly as well. If the signal's too loud or too quiet, it will either cause problems and noise, or it won't be heard at all. So The signal levels are critical with data modes. Satellites and the International Space Station. At Foundation, you're allowed to use amateur radio satellites and to try to contact the ISS. Amateur radio satellites operate in allocated frequencies, so check the band plan to find out which. You should not transmit on satellite or ISS downlink frequencies, so that's what you would be listening on, and you shouldn't be transmitting on it. It works in like a repeater in that respect, in that the transmit frequency is different to the receive frequency. Check the schedule as part of your license for the availability and also the power restrictions. Logging. Logging is no longer mandatory, but it's good practice and helpful for contests, awards, and QSL, which is a confirmation of contact. Quite often people send QSL cards, which is like a postcard with name, date, call sign on, just confirming that they've been in contact with you, and they're nice to receive and to send as well. The log should contain call sign, date, time, mode that you've used, and logging is done in UTC. UTC is the universal time, and therefore depending on which time zone you're in, it won't matter. All the logs should still correspond, so overseas logs will match your log. Ofcom can mandate logging to help identify interference and compliance issues. Use of computer logging apps is common, and as is a traditional paper-bound logbook as well. As you can see from the picture included there, it contains all the information for each contact, and this is a lovely thing to have and build over the years, and it gives a real sense of achievement. Handling abuse. Transmission of music and the use of offensive or threatening language is not acceptable. Don't respond to any abuse you may encounter, and don't confront the perpetrator. If abuse is persistent, keep a log. The RSGB's OAS, Operating Advisory Service, can help with repeated abuse. Guidance on the Ofcom and RSG websites is available. To summarise, VHF QSOs: find someone using 145-500 FM calling channel. Have your conversation on a free frequency. With repeaters, this enables you to cover more distance, and radios need to be set for the offset and tones, and generally priority is given to mobile stations. Abuse: make sure you don't respond to any abuse that you hear.